think I'm going to get started now. Hi, I'm Dr. Judy Regensteiner, Distinguished Professor of Medicine and Director of the Ludeman Family Center for Women's Health Research. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our next edition of Let's Talk. Welcome to Let's Talk, Conversations about Women's Health. It's a lecture series created by the Ludeman Family Center for Women's Health Research in partnership with UC Health, for which we are incredibly appreciative. Tonight it is with gratitude and sadness that I announce that Nan Uday, who's been with the center for 9.5 years and a volunteer for years before that, is leaving the center. She's resigned. And Nan is a founder of this program and has brought her heart and soul to this program. And it has been a great privilege to work with her. And we will really miss her. We are delighted to bring you our special program tonight virtually. At the Ludeman Center, we study women's health and sex and gender differences, particularly in the areas of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and the intersection of mental and physical health. The Ludeman Center is committed to a future in which research includes women and men and accounts for sex and gender differences. We do this through research, by mentoring and training, and through educational events such as the one you are attending tonight. 10 years ago, Let's Talk was created to educate the community about health through evidence-based talks. Each of the lecture series is uniquely created and presented by scientific and medical experts. This evening, we're going to be focusing on behaviors to improve healthy living. It always comes up as a timely area of focus during the holiday season. We have a fantastic speaker lineup tonight with Dr. Scott Cypers, Megan Kelsey, and Amy Huebschmann. Tonight's program is going to be a slightly different format. Each talk will be approximately only 10 minutes. There will be then a moderated panel discussion, which I will moderate following the talks, and then a Q&A from the audience, because we know that this is something you value highly, you and the audience, in terms of getting to ask questions of the experts. Please type any questions you have for the speakers into the Q&A window. Tonight's program is being recorded. Recordings of past events and additional resources can be found at theludemancenter.org. Now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Scott Cypers. Dr. Cypers is an assistant professor of medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. He is the director of the stress and anxiety programs at the Helen and Arthur E. Johnson Depression Center and Children's Hospital, Colorado, and is a psychologist working with active duty military at Buckley Mental Health. His primary clinical and research interests focus on anxiety and stress-related issues, especially in improving outcomes around anxiety treatments and building innovative anxiety treatments. Thank you, Dr. Cypers.
Well, thank you. And I'm really glad to be here tonight with you all. And we are going to jump right in because time tonight, folks, is of the essence. So normally give this talk in a much larger format, but we're going to condense it down to the essentials, kind of like the cliff notes of stress management. And so the first thing, you can read a little more about my bio, but one of the ways I like to talk about stress is to think about it like that character from Harry Potter in terms of the notion of Voldemort. And that everyone in the story of Harry Potter was very scared to name Voldemort, to talk about Voldemort, because they were worried that by talking about him, they would give him more power. But there were two people who knew that that was the wrong way to go. And that by learning to talk about Voldemort and name him, you made it able to beat him and understand what to do. And so in that same spirit, just think about being able to name and talk about your own stress and not to keep it like a dirty secret as we dive in. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about what is stress and some really interesting findings as it relates to gender and generational status. We're going to give you a framework to think differently about stress and how to manage it, and then to talk about as a family things you can do to support each other in good stress management, all in 10 minutes. So here we go, folks. So the first thing again, there's a very cool report that the American Psychological Association puts out every year called the APA Stress Report in America. And as you can see, it's been going on since 2007, but we can start then looking at trends over time. And one of the most interesting trends in terms of gender is that women have always, since the course of doing this, have experienced and reported more stress than their male counterparts. But as you can see over time, as we get moved through the years, those numbers are starting to converge. And at the same time, the perceived, what people think is a healthy level of stress versus where they are in their stress, that gap continues to widen. And then you can also see just a number of gender differences when they really started to tease it out in an earlier report. But again, that women tend to experience more of their stress somatically and more than men, and that women are far more likely to say that they try to attend to their stress than men and use different ways of trying to cope. And then some interesting things as part of this report too, you can start to see that over time, there's also some generational differences. And don't have time to highlight all of them, but you can start to see that especially over this year, there's some generational differences in what people are really their top two concerns and what's stressing them out at this time. But there is some themes around the economy, money, and health, and their own health, which makes sense when we're in the middle of a pandemic. So now kind of want to jump into, with all these kind of facts in your head, I'm going to give you a quick stress test. And the stress test was designed through Harvard. But if you deal with stress, the chemical processes in your brain change. And so if you don't have any stress in your life, right now you're seeing two dolphins gently playing in the ocean. But if you're seeing anything else than two dolphins, please know that you deal with stress. And again, I think all of you are recognizing you don't see two dolphins right now, because the thing is, we all deal with stress. And what I want you to start to conceptualize, there's a lot of metaphors I use, but I want you to start thinking about stress as an alarm system. It's trying to get you to pay attention to something. Or another way to think about it is it's a best friend, or again, a protector. And in this way, it's always trying to remind you what you care about and get you to kind of perform. And when it's working well, it's motivating you. But as we start to get too much of it, or it's going off or interacting too much, instead of motivating us, it starts to, again, get in the way of our motivation and impact us. So how would any good alert system have to work if you think about it in this way? So imagine, look at that third image. I know it's scary, but I threw a cobra in your room right now, wherever you're watching. And so what would happen? Your stress system and anxiety would attach to that threat. And it would tell you what you need to do to stay safe. And so it would tell you how to stay safe and what to do to keep you safe. And we know this is sort of fight or flight. But the problem is what we tell a lot of our times, to ignore stress. And that doesn't work. If you try to ignore your stress, it only makes it worry more, because it's trying to alert you to danger. And so the job is to pay attention to the danger. And so the way I want to start to orient you to do that is to start thinking about stress differently, and start thinking about it like water in a dam. And if we don't have good ways to get the water out of the dam, what's going to happen? Eventually, it's going to crack, it's going to break, it's going to overflow. And that's a lot of the things that happen when we don't have good ways to take care of our water. So what good stress management entails, and we'll talk about, is starting to tune in to the water in the dam, to listen and make sense of what your stress system is telling you. And as I said, that stress system to work well, to get you to pay attention, cannot send you a message in a positive way. So if it says you're going to do fine on that test, you're going to do fine on the holidays, it's going to go great. Oh, presents will show up. Don't even worry. You don't have to think about it right now. That's not going to put you on alert. So your stress system, in order to work effectively, has to give you signals in more of a negative fashion to get you to pay attention. So the first thing we want to do for good stress management is to listen to what our stress is telling us. But we want to uncouple the way the message is being delivered from what it's telling us. So for example, if it tells us the holidays are going to be a disaster, the message underneath is that I care about the holidays. I want the holidays to go well. Or if the message is you're going to fail the test, that's how it's coming. But the underlying thought is I care about this test. So what you want to do and start to do with your stress is something like, I hear you, stress system. I hear you, stress buddy, telling me what could go wrong or what I need to pay attention to. And that's the first thing you want to do in this 3-step process. Number 2 is then you want to start to sort your stress into different categories. And the first type of category is fixable or unfixable. So fixable means when I recognize the stress, there's something I can do to take care of it. There's something I can do to fix it. Unfixable is something I can't do. I just have to kind of deal with it. And in overreaction, that's what anxiety does. It takes something we're stressed about and it attaches a negative outcome or that we're not going to be able to do it. So we're overreacting to what we're stressed about. So quickly, if you were worried about paying a bill and you had the money to pay it, that's a fixable stressor. If you have cancer and get a diagnosis, that might feel fixable to you, that might not. But we'll talk about with unfixable issues, it's not about fixing, but it's about how do I get support? How do I get the water out through release? And if it's an overreaction or anxiety, we want to learn how to challenge it. So if I'm worried about what I'm going to have for breakfast in August of next year, that's something I don't really have to worry about. And I can say, hey, stress system, you're overreacting. You don't need to worry about that. Just kind of chill out. So we already went over, after you kind of start identifying your stressors and categorizing them, then you want to put them into categories and proceed accordingly. And then the last step is then you can imagine what this is going to lead to is a whole bunch of things on a list, a whole bunch of to-dos. And then part of good stress management is then knowing which order of operation should I start tackling these stresses that I have on this list. And so there's a great way to kind of start doing that. And there's 2 categories to consider. Category 1 is how important, how much do I care about this stress, this stressor? So for example, if it's related to my kids, I really care about it. If it's related to, let's say, an acquaintance, maybe I don't care so much. And then the other thing we want to think about is a deadline. How close to a deadline is it? So category 1s are things that are high deadline, they're due tomorrow, and I care a lot about it. Maybe giving a good talk tonight, and now we're in the talk and having the presentation done. That was a category 1. The next category is still the deadline is tomorrow or very close, but I don't care as much about it. Maybe it's paying a cell phone bill. I need to get it done, but it doesn't have such an impact for me. Then category 3 is I care about it, but the deadline isn't close. And number 4 is low deadline, low salience. So folks, I want you to recognize one of the things we do when we're really stressed, it's an interesting thing we do as humans, we tackle things out of order. We clean our house before we work on the paper that's due tomorrow. And cleaning will never be a number 1. It might be a number 3 or 4. But again, I want you to challenge, and a good way to go is never tackle anything outside of the quadrant that you're in. So you never move to number 2s before you've tackled all your 1s. You never move to 3s till all your 2s are done, and continue down in that pathway. So then we want to, again, prioritize and attack. And then thinking about sort of the idea of stress management, I know we're putting on its head and really fast, but thinking about it like watering a dam. If you ever look at a dam, it has these auxiliary valves. And the auxiliary valves are down below and they help take the pressure out. So part of what good stress management will be is making sure, especially during this time, we're helping to engage in those auxiliary valves. And I call this time between Halloween through New Year's, I call it psychological cold and flu season for a number of reasons. The cooler temperatures, darker earlier, the less sunlight, and the stress of the holidays just are the perfect storm to really impact our mental health. And so there's a lot of the more traditional stress management that do help. And I would say they're not the keys to deal with stress, but they do help. And so here are some: getting good sleep, getting exercise, eating well, engaging in meditation and things with the body, connecting with people, engaging in things that you love, engaging in music, engaging in your passions, which I call soul food. So if you're watching with someone, or again, we'll talk about if you have kids, just to think about during this cold and flu season, what's my extra little vitamin boost? What am I doing to help? And what am I doing to help kind of keep the water down outside of the big things I need to do for stress management? And so one of the last things that I encourage people to do is to not get caught up in one area of our life. And so these are kind of the different areas of our life. We can be a learner, we about ourself, our job, our family, our social self, and then other. But we can start to think about these categories, and we can start to think about, well, what am I stressed about as it relates to my social life? My friends, my romance, my clubs, and we can start to then use this as a way to start to categorize, to start that process. And when we're doing good stress management, we're not just focusing on one area, but we're really paying attention to our whole self and identifying what it is that's stressing us out, what's that water about, and having good ways to get the water out. So the last thing I'll share is I grew up in the area of education, and my mom was an English teacher, and the military I worked in. And if there's not an acronym, it doesn't exist. So I call this sort of thing, when we're engaging in good tools, we're using what I call our smart brain. So the last thing I want to say in terms of the intergenerational kind of how do I help my kids? How do I help in the generations to improve stress across the family? So if there's anything you heard tonight that you like, I'll encourage you to start practicing. And if there's something you learned, have you taught it? Can you teach the idea of our stress dam? Or with kids, I use the stress backpack. Same concept. We got to look in the backpack and we got to look in what's there and clean it out. If again, kids learn so much more, not from what we say, but what we model. So I would encourage you to have them see you modeling, and that's this down here, putting the mask on yourself, and taking care and doing good stress management work. And there are things as parents that we can talk about, but I'm running out of time, that increase our stress. And so we want to avoid increasing our kids' stress by only pointing out what could go wrong, by not letting our kids kind of learn these tools. We want to recognize both stressing ourselves and our children, and when they're kind of stressed, how that looks in their body, help them call out Voldemort and learn how to tackle. And that part of that is making it part of the conversation. And then the last part is taking care of yourself. And some tips for taking care of yourself, and that's the last thing, is a lot of times I've been calling COVID the worst marathon ever. And so now where it's beyond just a marathon, folks, we're in the 100-mile marathon, the one that is just all enduring. And so I'll encourage you to keep thinking about your pace and your kids' pace. Are we running at an okay pace given all we're trying to do, or are we pushing too hard? And that's a good thing to check in both for yourself and your kids. Another that I don't have full time to go into, but remember there's this whole body called love languages. And love languages are the way that people help feel valued and cared for. And in all my work right now, that's a big deal. I hear a lot how people don't feel as valued or appreciated for the work they're doing. And there's a lot of ways that we can help people, help each other feel more valued. And I'll encourage you to lean into that. And again, putting the mask on yourself first if you can. And then the last thing you'll see, the other picture, is if you have little kids, the best time to practice anything, I'm a big believer, the car time is a great opportunity. It could be so nice just to listen to music, to not do anything in the car. But a car time is where you have a captive audience to practice skills, talk about things, and work on this. And I'll really encourage you to take advantage of that. So last thing before I pass it off is, again, I have a metaphor for everything, as you hear, but I like to take one moment, just take a nice deep breath. I flew through so much. I know it was so much, but just think about if anything kind of stuck from the talk. And I call a red light something you might stop doing, either in your own life or in a role you play. A yellow light, something you're going to keep doing based on what you heard, pat yourself on the back. Or a green light, something you might start doing based on what you heard. And just take a moment and write that down for yourself. Hold yourself accountable to that. And folks, you've been great. I think I went over my 10 minutes. I'm really sorry. I tried to be quick, but I'm going to pass it off.
Thanks, Dr. Cypers. That was a lot of good messages that I listened to carefully. So thank you for that. Our next speaker is Dr. Megan Kelsey, who's going to speak about forming healthy habits early in life. And she's going to talk about the role of parents and grandparents. The idea for this session was suggested to us by one of our major donors, actually, and that person knows who they are, and I'm very grateful because I think it was a creative and terrific idea. Dr. Kelsey is currently an associate professor in pediatric endocrinology at Children's Hospital, Colorado, where she serves as the director of lifestyle medicine endocrinology, and she's also medical director of the Bariatric Surgery Center. Her research broadly focuses on improving prevention and treatment of type 2 diabetes in youth, and she is the co-investigator for a major study in that area. I will turn things over now to Dr. Megan Kelsey with great pleasure. Dr. Kelsey.
Thank you, Dr. Regensteiner, and thanks so much for having me today. So I'm going to move on and talk about how we can form healthy habits early in life. And I hope that Dr. Cypers has you nice and relaxed, because I'm now going to bring you back to a scene of chaos where a lot of us live in households where both parents or caregivers are working, sometimes doing shift work, passing care off from one person to the next, maybe a grandparent to a parent. And this can create a lot of chaos for kids, and especially younger children really thrive on routine. That's why the kindergarten teacher has that nice schedule that is followed every single day. And we can encourage healthy behaviors and less stress by making routines for our kids. So the first area that's really important is sleep. Kids do their growing during sleep. Getting a good amount of sleep helps them be less grumpy and less irritable. It also helps them perform better at school. And it actually can change your eating behaviors. So for a kid, what does that mean? A 3 to 5 year old needs 10 to 13 hours of sleep a night. A 6 to 12 year old needs 9 to 12 hours, and a 13 to 18 year old needs 8 to 10 hours of sleep. So when you're thinking about your routine, maybe make it rooted in that total time of sleep and thinking about when they need to be in bed and when they need to wake up to get that amount of sleep. And so the next part is thinking about that sleep routine. So bedtime has to be really specific. Think about all the steps kids have to go through to get to bed. Some of them need to have story time when they're younger. Some need to brush their teeth, and well, everybody needs to brush their teeth, but you need to think about all those things that have to happen before bed. And so when you're thinking about bedtime, you have to know when they have to be in bed to know when they need to start going to bed. And that means, especially for the older kids who tend to be on their phones a lot, making sure that they're off the screens 30 minutes before bed, that light from the screen that can make it harder for them to go to sleep, and that we don't encourage people to have screens in their bedroom. And getting up time needs to be a reasonable time. And, thinking about stress and having a routine, that means in the morning, making sure they have enough time to do everything they need to do to get ready for school and not being rushed. But also trying to keep that time consistent. Many of our teenagers travel, we call it social jet lag. It's like they travel to another time zone over the weekend where they're going to bed at 1, 2 a.m. and then waking up at 2 p.m. And so we want to try to keep that weekend and weekday routine as close as possible to the same thing, because that shift, you know how you feel when you change time zones, it doesn't help with your energy. So what does meal routine look like? So you want to make sure that you plan your snacks and meals to be around the same time every day. And the goal is for them to come to the main meals feeling hungry so that they'll be more likely to eat what you serve them. So that means scheduling snacks at an appropriate time and not right before dinner. If your kids are like mine, my kids come in usually as I'm preparing dinner, about 15 minutes before I'm about to put it on the table, telling me they're going to die if they don't eat anything, and right this minute, what can they eat? And so you tell them when it's going to be ready, and you ask them what they can do until that time. Maybe that's helping you prepare the food, maybe that's helping set the table, maybe it's finding another activity to keep them distracted until that dinner time. In between meals and snacks, the kitchen should be closed. You can tell them when the next meal is going to be, and that it's not a time for eating between. That helps to encourage kids to eat when it's available to them. And so, Dr. Cypers just talked about card time as being an important time with your family. And for us, it's more dinner time. And so, dinner is a time that everybody can get together and talk about their day, maybe ask the kids to tell something funny that happened at school. And so it's a family time, and it's not just about the food on the table, but it's about having time together. And so that means not having screens at the table. Maybe have everybody put their phones in a basket before they sit down. Have a conversation, ask a question. What's the funniest thing that happened at school today? And really make it a valuable time for the family. And so one of the things that we recommend is to serve the plates in the kitchen and bring them to the table. This helps people recognize when they're full and when they need seconds, so that it's not right there in front of them to serve. And everyone, even the mothers that are busy preparing, or the fathers that are busy preparing food and not maybe feel like they're too busy to sit at the table with the kids, should really sit down and take that time, and ask for everybody to be seated and to stay seated while it is meal time. So how do you encourage kids to eat the foods that you want them to eat? One thing is to keep healthy foods in the home, and to try to avoid to have a lot of snack foods or unhealthy snack foods or junk food in the house. And it's almost worse to have it there and have it up high on a shelf than to not have it, than to have it out in front of them, because that makes it as like the forbidden fruit. And we all know that the kids want to have what they're not allowed to have. I can't tell you the amount of times I find my kids sneaking something and then they're not hungry for dinner. And so if you keep the hard to resist foods out of the house, the kids can't eat them. Make it easier to reach for a healthier food, and make the other foods, well, I prefer to not have them at all, but all food should be out of view, so they're not thinking about it every time they come into the kitchen. And so the question that everybody wants to know for kids is how to get them to eat fruits and vegetables. And the answer is to practice often. And it doesn't work for everybody. Every kid has different tastes and preferences, but they will not eat the food if it's never served to them. And so it's up to us as parents and caregivers to decide what the foods that we want them to eat, and then how to serve that food. And so what we want to do is praise them for even looking at it, and to discourage annoying behaviors. So this is what a healthy plate looks like. We want our fruits and vegetables to take up about half the plate, and for the protein to take a quarter, and the healthy grains to take a quarter of the plate. So we decide, the parents and the caregivers decide what is served, and the kids decide what to eat. And many of us grew up in a household where we were told we have to finish everything on the plate, and that's no longer recommended. It actually doesn't work, and may discourage kids from enjoying the food, and that's what we want them to do. So part of this, getting them to eat what we want them to, is to encourage them to come to the table hungry, so not serving snacks right before meals. Don't serve them a daunting amount of food. Try to serve them a very small portion, so that they're not overwhelmed by foods that they aren't familiar with or don't think they like. And encourage them to and serve some foods that they do like, and enjoy new foods yourself, and they'll be more likely to experience new things if you're experiencing a new thing as well. You want to ignore behaviors, but don't ignore the child. So if they're being negative about the food and saying they don't like it, you want to ignore that, but you want to encourage good things. So praise any interest in the new food, praise them for not complaining, praise them for touching or licking it. We used to say not play with your food, but I think that it's okay if the kids are trying something and experiencing something new. And even if they spit it out, don't ignore that behavior, and actually praise them for trying the new food. The more they try it, the more they smell it, the more they taste it, the more likely they are to eat it. So I know I'm running out of time. I just want to finish up by what is recommended for physical activity for kids, and that's 5 days a week, at least an hour a day. And this is any kind of moving and can be broken up. So if your kid walks to school a few blocks and that's 10 minutes, that's 10 minutes of activities. Climbing trees, playing tag outside, this doesn't have to be an organized sport. And so the more kids move, the more they're used to moving, and the more likely they are going to do more formal activity when they're older. And I think that Dr. Huebschmann is going to talk a little bit more about activity. So I'd like to thank you for your time and encourage questions.
Thanks very much, Dr. Kelsey. Does encouraging them to we'll talk about it later, but some of those foods that we encourage them to eat, we think they do really well. And then around 2 years old, I've seen that I saw a while ago that they stop eating all those foods you thought they'd eat anything. But anyway, we'll talk more. Our third speaker today is Dr. Amy Huebschmann. Dr. Huebschmann is an associate professor of medicine and lead science for community outreach at the Ludeman Center for Women's Health Research at the Anschutz Medical Campus. She's also a primary care physician and, general internist at the Internal Medicine Clinic at the Anschutz Medical Campus. In her research, Dr. Huebschmann seeks to translate evidence-based programs to promote healthy behaviors for patients in clinical practice. And her work in overcoming barriers as an implementation scientist has been very exciting. So, Dr. Huebschmann.
Thank you very much, Judy, for that kind introduction. You'd think after doing this Zoom this often, I wouldn't have trouble with these transitions, but it seems like there's always something. So I'm going to take the baton from Dr. Kelsey, and thinking from an adult frame in particular about enjoyable ways to eat healthy and be active, but in sort of the spirit of the talks of the day, also thinking of this often intergenerationally and from a family perspective. And my charge was really to talk about what are the ways that this is fun, that we'll enjoy it, and that it's easy, that we can remember it and sustain these types of things. So I will talk about the recommendations for healthy diet and physical activity, much of which Dr. Kelsey already went through, so I'll be brief on that. And also then really focusing on easy and enjoyable ways to do this, meet these goals. So this plate you saw on Dr. Kelsey's slides, the notion that half the plate is fruits and vegetables. This is what a healthy diet looks like, is when your plate looks like this. And then half the plate is healthy grains and protein split like this. You see they're noticing things like focus on whole fruits. If possible, we want to do more fruits and not fruit juices and not as much dried fruits. Varied veggies that are colorful, whole grains, dairy, and this is just a picture of many foods from the Mediterranean diet, which fits really nicely with this type of healthy diet. So why does it matter? What's the point? So the point is, many people think about a healthy diet in particular for this point, this lower risk of obesity, but there's a lot of things that following a healthy diet helps you to do. Helps lower the risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer, hip fractures, so many different things. And the newest dietary guidelines are found at dietaryguidelines.gov, the United States guidelines. All right, so this was my charge, and I have the web link at the bottom here, and we'll share these slides, but there's some really fun ways to make healthy foods fun that I borrowed from this web link and kind of infused some evidence into them to talk to you about. So this is one on making your food just innately fun, right? It's fun like this when our food is an art project, maybe that we do with our kids, like the ones on the left and the right, or with grandkids. And they make these face plates where you can use things like carrots for eyebrows and spaghetti for hair and meat for a frown or something else. That can make a lot of food a lot of fun as a family. Other ways that it can be fun, particularly if you don't have littler kids, are things like gardening, getting into your food, growing your food. That can be a really fun thing to do with kids and grandkids of all ages. How do we make mealtime more fun? Dr. Kelsey talked some about this, and some of these things were on Dr. Cypers' ways that we keep the waters down, keep the waters from rising. So looking to make it a time where we're together, where we're having conversation. Dr. Kelsey listed some options for topics like, what was the funniest thing that happened at school today? I think, at least with my kids growing up, it was always sort of a tough one when I said, well, what happened today? Or how was your day? Sometimes that that was tougher. It was easier if you asked something like, what's something silly that happened today? Or sometimes, let's talk about highs and lows. Was there something that was a high point for today? What was a low point for today? Things that got a little more specific were easier to generate conversation. And of course, they make these like table topic cards where you can pick cards out and have people answer different questions. At least for my family too, it's often been good to do eating outside or grilling out where there's sort of some natural activity. We see this boy in the bottom right playing with a ball while people are setting a table, just some natural ways to make things fun. Another interesting one that was put forth on this list of 12 was the notion of mealtime blessings and taking time for gratitude and slowing down, bringing some meaning to the table. There's common threads in many different cultures around the world about doing a mealtime blessing where it's being having gratitude, being thankful for the food, for all those who grew it and brought it to you. There was a whole process for this, and being thankful for the opportunity to share it with one another. So those are some interesting things to think about if you're not already doing any type of a mealtime blessing, to see how that would fit for your family. The other thing about slowing down, I'll just say, is it means if you're not eating as fast, then you get more full more quickly. You let your brain get those sensors of, oh, I am full, because I've taken time to do things, talk other than just eat. It's allowed you to really know that you are full as opposed to just chowing down quickly. So how do we make it easy? I do think that this my plate approach, where I just sort of can think in my head, okay, is half of my plate veggies and fruit? And you see here, there's a easy way where you make it a salad for that, or you do a lot of cooked vegetables here, and then you have a few other fruits that you add. You've got enough protein, you've got little enough grains. It's really easy in our culture to overeat on rice, potatoes, other starches. You can buy plates that are segmented like this, or you can just keep this in mind for your plate. And another thing that's helpful is using a salad plate, a smaller plate as opposed to a big dinner plate. That just sort of naturally helps you keep your portions in check. And then let's move over to physical activity. Why does physical activity matter? So again, the newer physical activity guidelines are posted on the US health.gov website. And I took this infographic from there. And they have the 3 key benefits of physical activity that we're trying to promote: that it helps with stress, helps us have less stress, helps us have a better mood, helps us have better sleep. So there's a lot of mental health benefits. There's also many other benefits, including many of the same things we had on the earlier slide for diet, with improving the risk of heart disease, lowering the risk of heart disease, lowering the risk of diabetes. But I think many people discount or don't recognize as much that physical activity actually does have powerful effects on mood. And what are the recommendations? So Megan went through that it's an hour a day for 5 days a week for kids. For adults, it's a half hour a day for 5 days a week, or at least 150 minutes a week. Now, that doesn't mean you have to hold it to that. More is better, but that is the recommendations for adults, is to try to get at least that much in. You can see, as per the marketing here, the idea is if you're tight on time, just start with something doable. Start with fitting it in. What would be some amount of physical activity that's just a really easy goal? There's no problem with you fitting that in. Is that a 5-minute walk around the block? Is it gardening, doing a little bit of yard work, vacuuming, all kinds of options. And then there is also the recommendation to do muscle strengthening activities, resistance exercise, for at least 2 days per week. Again, as shared by Dr. Kelsey, everything adds up, and you can look at the way that this person's 150 minutes ranged from doing some chores with vacuuming to climbing up and down stairs. I know often on my lunch breaks, or if I'm just needing a brain break at work, I will just go and walk the stairs, go down the stairs, up the stairs for a couple of minutes as a nice just brain break for myself. Brisk walking, things like pickleball or other fun sports. Ooh, biking, exercising on an elliptical machine. So all of these things count. Anything that's movement matters. And you see, we tried to put some examples of other fun activities here. The average American, if you ask this question, what do you enjoy for physical activity? The number one answer tends to be walking, but many other people have different answers to that. And what I would really encourage you to think about is, what do you enjoy? What would you want to do in terms of physical activity? Or do you breathe a sigh of relief that you can count yard work or other chores? That all does count. I'm going to end with, we have these healthy diet, healthy activity, but then a lot of people still come back and say, but how do I lose weight? I really want to also lose weight. So I just have a few tips for that. One is thinking about, if you're hungry, does this feel like it's emotional hunger, like it's emotional eating? You don't really have physical cues. You don't feel hungry in your stomach. You might want something specific like chocolate. These types of things are, you're just wandering around the kitchen. These kinds of things are trying to eat for distraction or comfort, as opposed to eating because you're actually hungry. So you want to ask yourself those types of things. Keeping a food log is also beneficial. And there's a few different ways to do that I'm going to show on the next slide. Doing a support group like Weight Watchers or TOPS, Take Off Count Sensibly. So these are a few different ways that you can track your food, including mobile health apps like MyFitnessPal or Lose It, and also websites. Using a meal replacement, especially if you're busy, doing things like this for one meal per day that have a lot of protein and a lot of fiber can be a good substitute for, say, lunch, for example, or breakfast if you find yourself pressed for that. And a novel way is to really try to cut down our number of eating hours per day, no more than 8 to 12 hours per day of eating. Part of this goes with the notion of we're artificially letting ourselves eat more with artificial light and things that we would have in earlier centuries. Okay, and I have brought us up to the panel discussion, I believe, here. Judy, you're on mute.
No, I'm very impressed with myself that I know how to Zoom, but I guess after years of it, I better know. So now we're going to have a panel discussion and discuss some of the really interesting questions we heard during those 3 excellent talks. So I'm going to pose a question to one person, but please weigh in, all 3 of you, as you'd like to comment. Dr. Cypers, I'll start with you, but again, the conversation can go between all speakers. In all the areas mentioned, if you could get an overwhelmed parent to engage in one practice that would make the greatest impact on either sleep, eating, stress management, or exercise, what would you want that parent to do?
I have to unmute too. I would say, as parents, to remember, kids learn so much more from what they see, not what they hear. And so for each of these practices, if there's anything you want to improve, to really make sure you're doing it yourself. Are you prioritizing sleep? Are you kind of prioritizing and celebrating eating a healthy plate? And also too, are you sort of, with stress management, are you modeling and kind of demonstrating that you're aware of your stress dam and what you're doing? And so I'll always encourage you to kind of make sure that would be the number one thing, kind of modeling, and then continuing to try to talk about these things. Not only you must, but to engage in conversations with your kids depending on the developmental age.
Megan or Amy, would you like to add to that? And I want to let the audience know that these are all experienced parents. We all have kids at different ages and stages.
No, I totally agree. And, it's kind of what I talked about in terms of trying new foods in front of your kids and showing that this is new for you too. And I guess Dr. Cypers is telling me it's okay that my daughter says, "Mom, I can tell you're stressed today."
That's a really good point. I mean, I really like the, the Voldemort approach of naming it and trying to, if you can understand what's the biggest stress, trying to go there. But otherwise, out of the things you listed, sleep, eating, exercise, stress management, I've always felt like sleep, if you don't sleep well, then it's really hard to do anything else well. So I guess if naming it, you couldn't come up with one thing other than they're all important, then maybe I would prioritize sleep.
Megan, I have a question for you, and I think it's a really common question. Physical activity, and Amy Scott as well. Physical activity, you both listed the government recommendations for physical activity for adults and youth. And I would wager that most children and adults, in fact, I know this because of my own work, are not getting a fraction of that much activity. Our society is so sedentary. How does a parent motivate a child to exercise? Is the answer that the parent has to exercise? That might be one answer, but what are the secrets here? There's so much focus on competitive sports amongst a small group of people, but I think most people are not active. What can we do? Everybody, comments.
I think it's partly maybe not calling it exercise, moving in a fun way. Dr. Huebschmann talked a lot about doing things that are fun. And again, working it into your routine. If you live 2 to 3 blocks from the school, walk your kids to school, or let them ride their bike or roller skate. Roller skating actually is back in, apparently. My daughter does it. And making that movement fun, going on family activities, riding your bike to the store instead of driving, those kind of things are ways to work it in those segments that all add up.
Anyone else like to comment on that?
I mean, Megan hit it on the head, but I'll just say I've found for my kids at different stages, different things work too. Like those little ones are on the move. You don't have to do anything about it. You're just trying to keep up with them when they're, in that toddler stage and preschooler stage and early elementary school stage. And then as they get a little older and they're, sort of getting more into different things, it can be more challenging. I still find to that point, you just have to find then what is still enjoyable for them. Sometimes we'll do little dances in our kitchen and goof off with my teenagers, and that can be fun. And they're fine with it if it has to be less prescribed, less prescriptive at this age with the teenagers, and a little more organic. So it sometimes takes some just some brainstorming and like Megan said with foods for the little ones, trying different things.
Scott, psychologist.
Yeah, I would just concur. I think if it's built into the routine, it's not this novel thing. This is what we do. And, it's part of what's built into the schedule. It's built into the day. My kids know when it's a free day, they have to do, before they can just really relax, they have to do something for their body, something for their mind, and something for their soul, and something to be a good citizen of the house. And it's just built into the routine that's kind of what we do. And we talk about our values a lot and what we value, and kind of incorporating it into your value system. But, part of that value is we're a family that's active, or we're a healthy family. And this is part of what being a healthy family is about. We have activities that are movement-based activities. And that within that, you can make it fun. Different kids can pick and different things. But building that into the structure, I think, is really important. And I do really see kids when there's a structure, kids will fall in. But when it's given a choice, it's not going to happen.
Amy, let's start with you. A common refrain is that, well, I've tried to eat healthy and I've tried to exercise and it isn't working. I'm still not losing weight. What do I do? How do you get that patient to stay motivated? And this would be true for adults and children. People who just do exercise and don't calorically restrict typically don't lose weight. So what would you say?
Yeah, thanks, Judy. This is such a common refrain. Well, there's a couple of ways I try to approach this with my patients. Way number one is reminding them that there are still these intrinsic benefits of a healthy diet and healthy activity, even if they aren't losing weight. It is still helping you. Therefore, it's still good. Don't throw it out the window and think the only good thing about it was to lose weight. It has intrinsic benefit on its own. That said, when they're like, no, but I really want to lose weight, there's a few things that we can do. I shared some of those weight loss tips there on the slide, things like the time restricted eating, the weighing yourself regularly. The things that have shown the most benefit when people are trying to lose weight is keeping a food diary, whether it's written, whether it's on an app, anything. If you're writing it down, you're being literally mindful of what you're eating, and it helps address those emotional eating or non-hunger eating times, because you're like, do I really want to write it down? Do I really, you instead of just throwing it in your mouth. So those things are all helpful. That said, if people still are struggling with doing all of those things, and I mentioned the weight loss support groups as well, things like Weight Watchers or TUPS, then really the next step that I go with people is I talk with them about, this is where the conversation with the physician is important. Is it appropriate to do medication for weight loss? Are you at a level of obesity or overweight where this is harming your health, and we should actually consider medical treatments for weight loss, things like bariatric surgery. So there's those other conversations. The one other piece I did not mention is in the cohort of people who've successfully lost 20 pounds or more and kept it off that they've followed here at the University of Colorado over years. There's several common threads, one including eating breakfast. Most of the people who do that, who have successfully lost weight, eat breakfast. Another successful thing is they typically exercise an hour or more per day. So it's not that the exercise on its own is helping them lose the weight and keep it off, but it is very important. And we think it's particularly important when you've lost weight to keep it off and not have that yo-yo, I lose weight, I regain weight, I lose weight, I regain weight. So those would be my comments there.
And because people get confused by the word exercise, I think the word exercise can be threatening. Does walking count? Is that for that hour?
Yes. Yes, it does. It's not when we say, and I loved Megan pointing out too, especially when you want people to be more active, sometimes it's an intimidating word to say exercise. But moderate intensity exercise equals walking. And what that means is you just walk briskly enough that you couldn't sing. You can still talk to people, but you couldn't sing. That level of walking counts 100% as moderate intensity exercise.
Megan, what would you like to add?
Well, I love that Amy talked about that study, because that was the first study I ever worked on as a research assistant in the mid-90s. But I would just add that I just lost my train of thought. I was just thinking, so for kids, losing weight is not always the goal. For kids who are still growing, it may be that maintaining their weight is okay and letting them grow into their weight. So with kids who are struggling with excess weight, that's more of what we focus on. And again, establishing those behaviors is the first step, and the routine. And that, if for my patients who are often gaining weight very quickly, it's a big deal to stop gaining weight. And so, trying to be happy with some of the smaller goals.
Scott.
I'll just concur with what has been shared, but there's two other things I'll throw in the sense of mindful. I always ask people to take one moment before they walk towards the kitchen or they walk towards the snack area, and to take one moment and just ask themselves, I use this language of, is my smart brain on? Am I walking mindlessly, or am I walking with a thought and taking a moment? And I say to try to win the battle before you get in the room. And part of winning the battle might be not having those foods, as I think Megan talked about. Get them out of the house. If you know you can't resist chips, why have them in the house? But win the battles before. And then the last thing I'll share, I have a great friend who's a GI doctor. And I was asking him, I said, hey, what's the best evidence out there on the best diet there is? And he said to me, he said, if you're talking about it like a diet, it's destined to fail. Because diet means I do something for a certain period, and then I stop and go back to behaviors that are unsuccessful. And he says, what you really want to be thinking and talking more about is a lifestyle change, is adopting a lifestyle that supports being healthy and to engage in behaviors that kind of support that. And so that's just another way I kind of think about and talk about with people is how do we create a lifestyle that's going to support being healthy for the long haul and not see this as a temporary thing that we're stopping and doing and restricting and then adding. So those are just two other little tips to add to the additional tips I've already heard tonight.
Final question before we go into the Q&A session. What is the role of grandparents in encouraging healthy eating and exercise without causing further stress to the nuclear family? What's the ideal role of grandparents? Scott, you want to take that?
Sure. I think it's the first, we have these sort of, I would say, these society messages that are out there that grandparents' job is to spoil the grandkids. And by spoiling, a lot of times that comes from food, from all those things. But I would encourage, ideally to challenge that notion of the role you might play. You might not need to be the spoiler, but I would encourage to have some of that conversations with the parents, with, your own kids. How can I support you in your own goals? And to kind of think about, it's not, as a grandparent, the greatest gift you can do is help your kids around their own goals of parenting and not try to insert your own parenting beliefs on them. And so what I would encourage is to slow down and have that conversation with your kids. How can I support you with whatever you're trying to do with your kid and not just make it about what I think you should be doing with your kid? You had your, not to be crass, but you kind of had your turn. And now let your kids have their turn and try to support them in maybe a way your parents didn't help you. And that might be one thing I might recommend. And whatever that might be, if they say my kid doesn't, no soda, don't be the grandparent then at the movies who buys them soda or whatever it might be, to try to support the goals of the family that your kids are trying to do around being healthier. So that would be my thoughts around that.
Megan?
I think it part of depends on what the role of the grandparent is. There are grandparents that take care of the kid every day, and they really need, unfortunately, to be more, as Scott said, be in line and understand what the goals of the parents are and the sort of absolute no's and yeses are. That doesn't mean the grandparent can't be the spoiler on occasion, but there's a time and a place for that, and maybe that needs to be clear when that is. In families like mine where our grandparents live really far away, I'm kind of okay with them spoiling the kids here and there. That's their special time with their grandparents, as long as it's clear that, again, the very important goals of the parents and things that are kind of absolute no's for the family.
Amy?
I really just agree with what's been said. I was trying to think if I have anything else to add, just underscoring the point that it's good to be on the same page, right? That the grandparent and the parent have had a conversation of, are there any things we're really trying to stay away from, sort of some absolute no's, and if there are, I'll avoid those, but otherwise I'm gonna kind of have fun with certain things. I think the best part is when they can just naturally be enjoying each other and not stepping on eggshells. So those kind of conversations up front will be important.
And can I throw out one more thing? I
Of
really
course.
love what Megan was saying, and for sure. And one thing my wife challenged me on that I'll just share with y'all. Folks, I grew up in a culture where food was always the reward system. So food was the treat, food was the way you spoil, food was the way you say, great job. And as we've worked together in co-parenting, she's helped me see that that's sort of my go-to reward system, or my go-to, you had a great day, let's go somewhere special to eat. And challenging that there's a lot of other ways to, quote, spoil your kids to have that don't necessarily have to be tied with food. And it's probably actually healthier for, again, for all these reasons. Food doesn't have to be the only way we teach ourselves or our kids to reward, or to be special or feel loved or valued. There's ways to kind of break some of that that I think are also just to be aware of and be thoughtful of, rather than just food. And I'm working on that personally too, with my own parenting.
Sorry. What are those ways, Scott? That's I think we're all waiting to hear. What are the best ways? Because that's a very common trope.
Yeah. So it might be, again, it might be getting to pick the movie for family movie night, getting to pick the game, getting to pick the activity we do, getting a sleepover, getting out of a chore, getting to go to a fun activity or a special mom and dad night. These all might be other kinds of rewards that you could think about rather than just going to food. And just, quality time, back to that love language stuff that we can get to, but thinking about those, a massage, a back scratch, or a thoughtful gift, or, an action, or like I said, a chore, or quality time, or some kids just the words, that was great. That was amazing. You are rocking it. So those can all be different motivators.
Well, thank you. That was very good discussion. And I thought a lot of very helpful points emerged. And I thank you all. The last part of our evening, we have a relatively brief period for questions and answers. The first question, Scott, is about love languages. A person asked a question and didn't know what that meant exactly.
Yeah, great.
Would like to know more about that.
I flew through it, but if you type in on Google or anything, but there's this researcher named Gary Chapman, and he talked about that there's 5 different ways that we can feel cared for or valued. And he talks about a lot of the problems is that we learn to speak our language of love onto the people we care about. So for example, for me, one of my primary ways of expressing or feeling loved is touch. So when I want my kids to feel loved, I'm giving them hugs, or I'm, giving physical expressions. But what he talks about, and the same is true with our partners, is that each of us develop, for whatever reason, our own sense, our own kind of top 2. And what's really useful, and there's apps and games, but it's useful to start to understand what are your own kids' love languages, what registers to them. And so when you want to make them feel valued, or your spouse, for me, if my spouse wants me to feel good, she's giving me a hug. But if I want to make my spouse feel good, I'm doing the dishes. Because for her, acts of service, doing, is what is her valued way. If I'm helping out with the kids or saying, I got pickup tonight, that's the best way I can say to my wife, I love you. And for her, the best way she can say that she loves me is by giving me a hug, or, cuddling at night, and those kinds of things. And it's also been adapted to the workplace and all different environments. But it's a really great tool that can really be of service. And when everyone knows each other's love language, it can be a very powerful way of helping, again, feel valued and cared for.
Thank you. Megan's, one of our attendees asks, how do you make exercise cool to an adolescent?
Oh dear, that's the hardest one.
No, actually the question was about healthy eating.
Oh, okay.
But I guess exercise.
I don't know that that's any easier, but teenagers are hard. One thing is know that they will graduate from being a teenager. So that's the thing to remember. But you know, I think encouraging them to take part in the choices and what they think is healthy, and finding things that they like, and maybe even including them in the preparation if that's something interesting to them. I have a friend whose daughter makes the peanut butter for the family every week. And so I think, you know, finding ways to include your kids in the choices at any age, but especially when they get to be adolescents, is really helpful.
That's good. We're all thinking about adolescence we have known and how hard it can be, but there are ways. Our last question is about, again, exercise, including walking. You know, somebody was told in our audience that, you know, exercise is not just walking, but walking is exercise for any age group, not just for seniors. It's for every age group, including kids. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I was just mentioning before, depending on the level of the briskness of your walking, is whether it's moderate intensity exercise or it might be light intensity exercise. Any of those are helpful though. They're all beneficial for sure.
I had a great story about that when I was working with a diabetes study called the Look Ahead study. And a lady came to hear a talk that I was giving to our participants who had type 2 diabetes and participated in a exercise and diet program. And the lady raised her hand and she said that about a few days ago that her grandson had called her and said, "Nana, do you want to take a walk with me?" And she almost fell over. She was so surprised because he had never shown exercise or interest in exercise. And they started walking together. And the two of them walked together regularly. And it became a habit, which was wonderful for both. So that's always exciting when you can get somebody to take a walk with you. That's good for them and good for you. So with that, I'm going to end the program for tonight. I want you to please fill out the surveys and visit www.ludemanncenter.org to learn more. Our next program will be on February 9th and will be about cardiovascular health in February, which is Cardiovascular Health Month. So thanks so much for coming today, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to our speakers, most of all, for providing the talk. Thank you.